We're Stacy and Sean, and we live in a school, a literal 9,000 square foot century-old schoolhouse surrounded by Indiana cornfields. 4 years ago, I opened an email from our realtor. The subject line was, "Don't judge me," and attached was a listing for a crumbling brick school with a failing roof, broken windows, bats in the attic, and a whole lot of reasons to run away. But my first thought was, we have to buy this. We had no construction experience, no real plan, a newborn baby, and we lived in New York City, so naturally, we bought it. This video is a time-lapse of what happened next. 4 years of learning how to turn a dilapidated former public building into our family home. We knew it would be hard, and we didn't know how hard. But we also knew this might be a once-in-a-lifetime chance to build something entirely our own in a unique building with a colorful and fascinating history. By the end of this video, you can decide for yourself. Did this massive, financially questionable idea work out, or did we get completely schooled? Oh shit, there's a bike here! For those of you who've been following along our story for a while, I've been pulling some late nights editing this video to include a lot more storytelling and explanation, more of the why behind our decisions, and the people who've helped us get here. Plus a few never before seen moments along the way. We're kind of winging it. That's where you figure it out as you go. Back in 2021, when we made the biggest decision of our lives, we were two Midwest kids living and working in New York City. The school we bought was just minutes from both of our parents in the small hometown we'd spent years away from. It was mid-pandemic, and we were deep in that late-night spiral of what are we even doing with our lives? And when this schoolhouse came up for sale, somehow it didn't feel insane compared to everything we'd just lived through. It felt like, hey, let's go home. That summer, the company I'd worked for a decade went public. I joined as the third employee, and the early stock options gave us just enough money to buy the school for $175,000 and begin cleaning and prepping for the major repairs we needed to do. I still remember our first walkthrough after buying it, driving up the road, watching the building rise out of the cornfields like a little Midwestern castle. We were so excited and also wildly naive. We had no idea what we just signed up for. Yeah. Oh, whoa. Okay. As we started wrapping our heads around everything it would take to turn this place into a home, we also dove into the school's history and the lives it held before us. Our school, Union Joint Graded School Number 9, has stood proud and slightly lonely in the middle of Indiana crop fields for over a century. It opened in 1914 to serve rural students from the edges of two townships, mostly farm kids just leaving behind one-room schoolhouses. But by 1936, just 22 years later, the doors closed. The world was changing. School systems were consolidating, and small rural buildings like this one were being left behind. It also probably didn't help that even with 100 students, there were 0 indoor toilets. After our school closed, a farmer bought the school and used it for livestock and apple storage. Then, in the 1950s, a former student bought it and converted it into her home, raising her family here and keeping the building alive for nearly 70 years, as other buildings like it across the country got torn down. By the time we found it, it was in rough shape, but still standing, and somehow waiting for its next chapter. So, we got going. Now, you're probably watching this thinking, look at these two who thought they could take on a project this big with 0 experience living halfway across the country. And you are not wrong. Our resumes were pretty worthless when it came to old house restoration and construction and project management. But luckily, we had a secret weapon. My dad.
Do one more.
And don't you let his construction crocs fool you. He's the real deal. He also does not enjoy being in my videos, so a lot of what I filmed from him in the beginning was a bit sneaky, but he'll make some brief appearances teaching us stuff throughout the video. Over the last 4 years, he's taught us how to find contractors, manage contractors, be the contractors, clean up the mess, and deal with the quirks of restoring a 100-year-old building. So step one was Cleanout. We needed to see what we were working with, so while Sean and I were still living on the East Coast with our jobs and Sean's medical residency, Robert and his crew from Tree Buddies stepped in. 7 dumpsters later, we had saved every original feature we could, doors and trim and rusty grates. Nothing fancy, but priceless to us. And as you'll see later, I can't resist salvaged wood, beat up old metal, especially when it's original to the school. With enough elbow grease and some questionable levels of obsession on my part, these pieces will make a comeback later in the video. We also found a lot of original things like ceilings and the plaster with the historic colors still visible. This got me really excited, and they're going to come back a bit later too. And that was just the inside. The schoolyard needed a lot of cleanup too. The winter after we bought the school, we tackled the first phase of the yard transformation. With the help of Shad, our dads, ourselves, and the real MVP, my dad's tractor, the yard at least looked like it might start to make a turn for the better. But back inside, we needed to tackle the most urgent, dangerous, and problematic problem of all, the roof. A century of harsh weather and a foot of tar repairs had destroyed some of the roof joists. When we bought the school, there were major leaks, one of which had a pool several feet deep on the roof. Not my first choice on a pool location, but I've learned that when you take on a crusty old building like this, you don't get your first choice in much of anything. And after so many pandemic supply chain delays, 6 stressful months after buying the school, we finally got a new roof. I slept a little easier knowing water wasn't pouring in from above, though the list of things keeping us up at night was still pretty long. To distract ourselves from the scary and expensive stuff, we made Schoolhouse gear. Over the years, we've designed everything from crests to notepads to library stamps to, my favorite of all, Royal Tenenbaums-inspired matching sweatsuits. Someday our kids will definitely look back and roll their eyes, but hey, when you plan on living in a school, there's no such thing as too much school spirit, right? Spring 2022 was all about drainage. With the help of Smart Crawl, we dug a trench around the entire building and installed pipes to pull water away from the foundation and keep it out of the basement. One bonus was they also helped us remove the crumbling, unoriginal front steps made out of geodes. We saved all the geodes we could, and I'll show more of our plans for an updated front porch a bit later in the video that takes it back to what the entrance looked like back in 1914. The rest of 2022 was planning season. We ordered windows, wrestled with floor plans, obsessed over the kitchen, and did a lot of brain work in Google Slides. It sounded fun at first, but it was surprisingly stressful. Every decision we were working on felt permanent, as we do plan on living in this place until we croak. Thankfully, my friend Danny helped us brainstorm layouts and the garage, and he even hit our dog Pimp Up all over his SketchUp renderings, which still makes me laugh. Once our brainstorms were in place, we brought in Emily from Shot Design in Indianapolis. She turned our daydreams into actual architectural plans that we could take to folks with a real construction building skills. Meanwhile, we moved from New York City to Philadelphia for Sean's last year of surgical training, and little Margot was born in October 2022. We were carrying a full course load, so to say, with 2 kids and jobs and so much to do, but Schoolhouse, it just kept on assigning homework. In December, we teamed up with Colin and George from Robert Young Construction. They reinforced the floors with big LVL beams because our future kitchen island and appliances and the walls, they're going to weigh a bit more than the 100 kids and desks that the floors were designed for. After that, the framing began and our plans started to finally take shape. In January 2023, we brought in someone who would become a main character in the schoolhouse renovation, Brad the Mason. Brad and his partner E had the enormous job of repointing the entire building, grinding out old mortar and replacing it. This keeps water out, helps the brick last another 100 years, and generally keeps the school from achieving its perpetual goal of returning itself to the earth. Brad started by cutting holes for new windows and breaking over old spots where we didn't need them. And just generally, Brad was a brick-whispering human bulldozer in work boots. In March 2023, our windows finally arrived. This was the biggest project of the schoolhouse. It has also been, without question, the most painful and dramatic. As I'm recording this in August 2025, we still aren't finished installing the windows. Can't give you the full play-by-play just yet. We have lawyers and all that. But back in March 2023, before the headaches, the lawsuits, the leaks, the multiple reinstallations, the existential dread, before all that, it was really exciting to think about what they were going to look like in the schoolhouse. Later in that spring, I finished 2 custom floor mosaics for the schoolhouse entrances. The idea had lodged itself in my brain back when we were living in Philly, and it quickly turned into an obsession. And honestly, it's a lot easier than it looks, and I've got a whole other video explaining the process if you're into those zone out and plug along puzzle projects that are so satisfying. Then, summer of 2023 rolled around and we moved back home to Indiana. Not into the schoolhouse, of course, but into our parents' houses with 2 toddlers. We clearly have incredible parents, and the plan was to crash for a couple months while we finished. But the schoolhouse, as it tends to do, had other plans. We stayed for way over a year, living out of our childhood bedrooms. While living out of suitcases with a couple hobgoblins, I found weird ways to stay sane. One of which was by stripping and refinishing every schoolhouse door felt like in existence. We still had all of the original doors from our school, but because we were adding bathrooms and kid rooms and closets, we needed more doors. I sourced a few from the Little Flowers Catholic School in Indianapolis, a few off Facebook Marketplace from a school in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, and that summer I stripped, sanded, repaired, and re-lacquered 23 of them. All after the kids went to bed or during nap time. Fall 2023, the windows were still being installed for the first time, and Brad the Mason kept grinding away at the repointing. But then came the plumbing and the electric. My son Arlo, like most small humans, is deeply into excavators and bulldozers, and to this day he still talks about the time he got to ride in one with one of the guys from Patent Plumbing. On the electrical side, we had new main characters enter the schoolhouse saga, the guys from Breeden Electric. They spent the fall installing over a mile of wire in the school, and at one point found a 72-inch snakeskin above one of the walls. 2 years later, I hope Neil has recovered from that surprise, But personally, after the mouse problems that we're having in the basement, I kind of would welcome a friendly little school snake patrolling the halls. And then in November 2023, Adam and his crew from Arrow Earth rolled in. They tore out all the old asphalt in front of and around the building and started building us a driveway. Looking back at all these clips, I just chuckle at how thrilled we were by each step. Things that felt so monumental at the time that are now just like part of the landscape. And it's a good reminder not to take any of this for granted. December 2023 brought another unexpected detour, making the creepy basement slightly less creepy. We hadn't planned on it, but after spending more time down there with the crumbly, dust-producing floor, we decided to pour a fresh layer of concrete. The goal was to make it feel like we're not walking on the set of a post-apocalyptic movie every time we went downstairs. You can definitely see that the school's era as a barn had made its impact on the basement floor. Kenny and Chance from Specialty Concrete and a crew that included a few local guys whose ancestors actually went to our school handled the job. This was one of those stop and think moments, realizing how many lives have passed through this building. Upstairs, there were big changes too. Insulation. It is one of those oddly satisfying jobs to watch in time-lapse form, although I do still have speckles of spray foam on one of my cameras as a permanent souvenir. The next thing we tackled was a little unplanned, but it's now one of my favorite features in the whole schoolhouse. The building itself is one giant brick box, and some of the walls still had plaster. The problem, a lot of the plaster was cracked, crumbly, and generally a big pain to fix. But behind it was this brick. One of the neurotic things that keeps me up at night is the constant worry, am I making the right choices for this old building? Are we doing right by the old girl? And historically, sure, this brick would have been covered in plaster. But the brick was just too interesting to hide. So, we asked Brad the Mason to take the plaster off. Then the problem was that plaster left behind a dull, chalky haze. We tried scrubbing, water, vinegar, no luck. Brad's solution? Grind every single brick with an angle grinder and a cup brush. Completely nuts, but as I mentioned before, Brad is a machine, and it worked. After that, the brick was looking much better, but then it was my turn to figure out how to seal the brick, something that would bring out all those rich colors while also keeping the walls from constantly shedding brick dust, which is one of the big downsides of exposed brick. That research took me a while, so we'll come back to that later. Meanwhile, Derek, Phil, Brandon, and Ricky working nights and weekends to get all of our HVAC installed and running, building big old octopuses of new ductwork all over the schoolhouse. Then came the really big transformation, and the transformations, they started happening fast. Colin and George, who worked with us the year before, came back to manage all of the drywall installation. This was the moment when I'd walk into the schoolhouse, and for the first time, it actually felt like a house. The echoes were gone, the rooms were taking shape, and instead of imagining our life here, I could start to see it. In February 2024, Adam's crew from Arrow Earth rolled back in with their excavators and skid steers and broke ground for the garage foundation, the next big outdoor phase.
What do you see right here, Arlo?
Hole.
Holes? Yeah? What do you see over here?
An alligator.
A what?
An alligator.
Yeah.
Back inside, a new Schoolhouse character appeared, Greg the Tile Guy. He started by repairing one of the few plaster walls that we saved in the soon-to-be green bathroom. We thought we'd paint it, but after Greg was done, it looked like a little Midwestern fresco, so we kept it. And after seeing what it looks like in the finished bathroom, I'm so glad we did. So hold tight for that reveal. Got a little bit more work to do in here. Greg also started tiling around the schoolhouse, and his quiet, meticulous approach made me realize that Greg is such an artist of his trade. Upstairs, I was finally tackling my brick ceiling saga. After watching a ton of videos, asking questions in Old House Facebook groups, calling some masonry-specific companies, and then testing about a dozen products, I landed on a two-step process. First, a breathable consolidant to lock in the mortar, and then Aquamix to make the brick's colors really glow. Call me Goldilocks, but for brick. Meanwhile, Brad the Mason was still here, now in the basement. With his sidekick Hez, they were repointing the engine room, an unassuming little space that we were scheming into a cocktail cellar. Brad took out all the old ductwork, a truly terrifying task, as this is what the room looked like when we bought it, and he also raised the steel beam that was in here so that it was actually usable as a room, and then repointed the whole thing. transformation down here was truly wild, but it would be a few more months before we'd start adding cabinets and actual cocktail supplies in this cocktail cellar. After that, it was back to doors and trim. Our friend Chad started hanging the doors that I'd refinished the summer before, which was deeply satisfying to see them back in place. Then came the baseboards. I'd love to say that we restored them out of pure preservationist passion, but there's nothing like the sticker shock of finding out the price of an 8-inch, 16-foot baseboard to making you suddenly very motivated to scrape nails and patch holes. After we repaired all the trim that was off the wall, we switched to repairing the trim that was still on the schoolhouse walls, filling plaster holes, patching endless gaps. That spring into summer, our routine was dinner with our parents, kids to bed, then over to the schoolhouse for a few hours of work. Back home, shower, sleep, repeat. It was definitely in these tasks where we were like, are we ever going to get to live here? It was the real renovation doldrums. And it also didn't help that our window leaking disaster was slowing everything down and making us rearrange contractors with big delays. But somehow, we survived. One of the coolest original features in the schoolhouse was this front vestibule of windows where the kids would enter the school each day. We did a lot of scraping repairs on this section and even learned how to fix broken glass and reglaze old wooden windows. It was super satisfying to finally feel like we were leveling up in our old house repair skills, though it's projects like this that deepen my appreciation for folks with professional caulking and glazing skills. Also happening during all this, the floors. Dave and Micah from Guardian Flooring are the kind of pros you hope for but rarely find. They meticulously scraped the old stair treads, restored one room of original floors, and watching the crusty old dusty subfloor get covered up with new clean boards, it was something remarkable.
Wow. They smell good, huh? Wow.
What do you think, bud? These floors are nice.
Wow.
Oh, that's a hole.
Still gotta fix that hole.
Yeah.
What do you think, Margot?
Mom, do float in the hole.
Thanks, bud. Get.
Marco! This is a new bathtub. That's a new one.
That spring and summer of 2024, after the kids went to bed, we also spent most evenings in the schoolhouse building our kitchen. Just us, no crew, a little advice here and there from Chad and our dads, but we were the grunts. If we'd gone the custom cabinet route for this double-decker kitchen, the price tag would have been astronomical. So we got creative. I'd heard about this company called Semi-Handmade, where they make custom fronts that fit on IKEA cabinet bases. And back when we were still in New York, we'd visited their showroom and we were really impressed. So we decided to go for it. We planned our kitchen, ordered everything, and crossed our fingers. Now, building the cabinets felt really daunting at first, but once we got organized and took it piece by piece, it actually became satisfying, like a huge puzzle. And we didn't kill each other in the process. Sean handled all the cabinet hanging by himself, which was no small feat. We were nervous about drilling into the brick, but between Tapcons and the IKEA hanging rail, these cabinets aren't going anywhere. They're definitely stronger than cabinets hung in drywall. Meanwhile, I took Arlo to S&F Marble and Granite here in Indianapolis to pick out our countertops. I love that shop. So many stone places that I went to just show you rows and rows of white and gray slabs. Saul and Fernando's business has been in the same spot for 30 years, and their warehouse is full of the most gorgeous, surprising remnants. I actually changed the design for a whole bathroom because of this broken piece of translucent onyx that they said they could repair. The stones here, they're just that wild. Working with Saul and Fernando and Adolfo and Jason, it was such a joy. They're funny and they're generous and they really go the extra mile for their customers. By the time they came to install the countertops in the kitchen we had built with our own hands, it was the first time I stood in there and thought, okay, this is a real kitchen. We did it. And after a decade of tiny New York City kitchens, it sure was something. Moving on to paint colors. By this point, the decision fatigue was deepening, but this one was exciting. We got to team up with Up Paint, a company that rescues unused paint from all over the country and gives it a second life. Instead of tossing the paint into a landfill, Up Paint purifies it, remixes it, and turns it into premium paints. Now, picking the colors for the entire schoolhouse at once, it was overwhelming. But then we realized the answer had been here all along, on the plaster. We pulled the colors from the original walls, had them matched, and then brought them back into the building so that the schoolhouse could, in a way, paint itself. We ended up creating 11 custom colors with Up Paint, and you can buy them too. Watching Dave and Chris transform all the schoolhouse rooms with paint, it did help with those renovation doldrums for sure. With Roy, who is Roy's the creative director at Up Paint, and today we are photographing some vignettes featuring the newly painted walls. July 2024 was what I call the scritches and scratches era. I had a brief relapse into trim work because you never realize how much trim is in a house until you're the one dealing with all of it. I had to pick up some new board, and we mixed staining and painting depending on the wall they were heading to. By this point, I'd gotten pretty handy with both the paint and the lacquer sprayers. We also decided to stain and lacquer a doorway that was already hung between our bedroom and the office. But there was one part of the door that was white. So instead of getting creative with paint, I decided to gold leaf it, which was pretty fun, but also gold leaf gets everywhere. So consider yourself warned. It was at this point that we realized we needed more doors because we forgot to calculate in the kid closet doors. Luckily, I found a guy named Kyle a couple towns away who has the most incredible stash of antique doors and municipal lighting over in Monrovia, Indiana. From Kyle, I picked up 3 old bathroom doors that used to be in an old office building in Detroit, and they were perfect and weird. My specialty.
What do you think about it?
It's pretty old.
It's pretty old? Yeah. Do you want to go in your closet and check it out?
There's tape in here.
There's tape in there? You don't want tape in your closet? What do you think of the paint? What do you think of the walls? What do you think of the walls?
The walls are beautiful.
Oh.
Outside, there was just as much action. The garage was coming together, rising from the ground almost like a little barn raising. And this was one of the rare projects where we weren't acting as the general contractor, and I was very grateful to have Jerry's advice along the way. New construction is definitely a different beast compared to restoration work with so many pieces to orchestrate together. The foundation and footers had already gone in back in February, but now it was time to pour the walls. Dawn and Gabby's crew from Masonry by Muller showed up and things really started flying. Suddenly what had just been a drawing on the computer started looking like a real building. Hopping over to the front porch, it looks simple enough from the street, but wow, it was a ton of work behind the scenes. Back in 1914, the school sat pretty close to the road, and that wasn't much of an issue when kids were showing up on ponies and farm wagons. But you fast forward 110 years, and too close to the road is suddenly a zoning problem. So to rebuild the porch the way it was originally, we had to file for a variance to get a couple extra feet approved. That meant paperwork with the planning and zoning folks, a formal meeting, and me standing giving a presentation arguing for our front porch. And luckily, they approved it. Before long, the bones of the porch were taking shape. Back inside, it was time. Greg, the tile guy, was finally installing the mosaics that I'd made over 2 years before. To finally see them in place after all that waiting, it definitely felt like Christmas morning and the first day of school rolled into one.
grout. It's like mud.
Well, mud is not that color. Well.
He's not cleaning, he's grouty.
Next up came the lights. Sean, our electrician from Breeden Electric, came through and installed every fixture. I'd always been on a mission that nothing in here could look too modern. I wanted lights that looked like they'd always been a part of this building, and I found some great reproduction stores, but the real jackpot was hunting down actual antique schoolhouse lights, which is where a major character in this story starts to come in, Madison Street Salvage here in Franklin. The shop is legendary. They take donated furniture and salvaged finds, sell them, and use the money to restore things like our old movie theater downtown, or homes, or other historic spots. They're basically local superheroes with a warehouse full of treasures, and they're definitely worth a visit if you ever want to come visit our little town. And that's where I scored this antique schoolhouse pendant for our entryway.
But you don't get filmed putting lights in very often.
No.
I guess. Looks like it never left here.
Never left. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Schoolhouse construction has always been, and probably will always be, about coming up with creative solutions to weird little problems. And one of my favorite small wins was figuring out what to do with the big old deadbolt holes in the school doors that I refinished. Instead of trying to patch them, which never quite looks right, I decided to turn them into a feature. I broke out the laser engraver and designed these little medallions, some with the schoolhouse crest, some with barn animals that used to live in the schoolhouse, and for the kids' rooms, medallions with icons from the cities where they were born. We got New York City and Philadelphia. Hopefully we'll have an Indiana one someday. I color matched the wood and the varnish to the doors, glued them in place, and boom. What used to be a problem spot became this sweet little detail that feels like a family story tucked into the woodwork. Then, Micah and Dave from Guardian Flooring made their return. This time, it was all about stain and lacquer, transforming the floors into the finished stage the whole schoolhouse deserved. After they were done, Micah also happens to be a ridiculously talented drone pilot, and he got these amazing shots of the schoolhouse while the floors were still wet and curing. I am not a competent enough drone pilot to get anything like this, so I really appreciate it.
What do you think, Arlo? What do you think, bud? What do you think, Arlo? You what?
Whoa.
Oh my
Arlo, what do you think?
guys.
What do you think, Arlo?
It's like a house, you know?
Hey, look at that dog. Wow. No.
Aww. Go grab him. Do you remember that toy, Arlo?
After the floors cured, we could finally move stuff in. This was surreal. And it was definitely moving into a construction zone. Since we'd had a lot of surprise end of project expenses, hiring movers was not in the cards. So we muscled all of our furniture out of storage and our parents' houses ourselves. 10 plus years of nomadic apartment living later, I can say with confidence that I'd really, really like to never move again. That move-in era was a flurry. We were technically living here, but construction was still swirling around us. Plumbing odds and ends were getting buttoned up, bathroom mirrors needed to be hung, kitchen needed organizing, plus appliances were arriving, and then the joy of installing those appliances. Basically building a house from scratch. It's a lot. At the same time, we were scrambling to wrap up the last few details in the kitchen. One of my favorite touches was realizing that we had just enough of the broken glass from the original Schoolhouse doors to cut down and reuse them in the cabinet fronts. One fun fact, in old house restoration Facebook groups that I'm in, someone called this type of glass cat butt glass, and I will never, ever call it anything else for the rest of my life. Next up was hardware. I'd been putting this off a bit because I thought it would be complicated, but with a jig, installing the cabinet poles from Plank Hardware ended up being way easier than I expected. And then, maybe not the flashiest detail, but definitely the one with one of the best stories, was building the support for one side of the island. Saul and Fernando, who installed our countertops, had used steel reinforcements underneath this part of the countertop, but we still needed visible support that felt authentic to the schoolhouse. That's when my brother offered up a barn beam that he had salvaged from a friend's barn. A barn beam in a rural schoolhouse kitchen, it seemed perfect. With my dad's help, we cut the wormy old beam down to size, built the supports, and then hauled the whole thing back to the school for installation.
Wow.
This tree was, wow, this is an old tree. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, we even managed to tuck in a pantry installation because apparently there was no such thing as just one project at a time in this place. And even writing out all this stuff, I kind of forgot that we did all of this last year in the span of a few weeks. Next for the kitchen, something magical happened. I had mentioned to Christine at Madison Street Salvage that I was on the hunt for a really big dining table for this big classroom kitchen, like a big, fit the whole extended family kind of table. And ideally, I wanted it to come from a school or a library, something with history, something that felt like it belonged here. And sometimes the universe just shows off. Because right after we moved in, Madison Street got a massive donation of tables and furniture from a library that had just been upgraded. And sitting there in the middle of the truck was this table. Huge and sturdy and scarred in all the best ways. It was perfect. It doesn't even need to be refinished.
No, it's in really good condition.
Oh my gosh. The only thing that made it even better was it looked like it was meant to be with the dining chairs that I'd already found from Lennart's Etsy shop. After becoming friends with Lennart, I learned that these chairs actually came from his old elementary school in Slovenia. It's such a treasure over here in the kitchen. While we were moving in, the garage work kept rolling outside. Quality Roofing, who had already tackled the big schoolhouse roof, came back to install the rubber roof on the garage roof deck. After that, Jake the Glazer filled the expansion joints. And then Mike and Pat Dowdy got started on the roof deck. From first glance, this deck looks really simple, but in reality, it's a small engineering feat. The whole thing is sloped just enough to drain water away underneath, so building that deck was pretty complex. And with all of this construction, there are just so many steps to building something that seem easy, but I'm just so glad they're all behind us right now. The yard turned out to be way more work than we expected. Though, honestly, that's kind of the running theme of this whole renovation. Adam and his Aero Earth crew were back on site, installing proper drainage off the garage that daylights all the way to the back of the property. Along the way, we uncovered an old septic cistern and decided to fill in an abandoned well so that no small or large humans go falling in any mystery holes. And once that was handled, Adam's guys graded the entire yard and got it ready for grass seed. At first I thought, oh, I'll just plant the seeds myself. Like, no problem. I love gardening. But then Adam kindly walked me through the 57 steps actually required to get grass to germinate, and about halfway through his list, I was a bit overwhelmed. So his guys did that too. And watching them zoom around with a four-wheeler seeder was very impressive and a lot faster than what I planned to do. Of course, I still got my fair share of sweat equity in the form of watering the new grass 3 times a day for 6 weeks straight. And honestly, that might go down as my least favorite chore for the entire Schoolhouse project. There's nothing quite like trudging through mud, hauling sprinklers, getting soaked, and simultaneously wrangling toddlers to really test your patience and your cognitive function.
Hey, you want to go change the sprinklers? Let's go move it. Let's go move the sprinkler. Come on, Margot.
No.
I hate this chore.
And then, a few weeks after moving in, we hosted our very first party. Sean's sister was getting married, and we threw a big dinner for her hen party right here in our little corner of Franklin, Indiana. The brand new library dining table got its first big test, and it passed beautifully. After that whirlwind, things finally started slowing down, thankfully, and mostly. We were back to the little scraps and bits projects, which was really fun. Although we did discover that the windows were still leaking after their second full reinstallation, which meant that every rainstorm came with a side of stress. And that saga would stretch on for a whole nother year. But aside from battling the leaks, we kept chipping away at turning the schoolhouse into an actual home. That fall, I picked up some incredible finds from Madison Street Salvage, including a dreamy pastel map of Europe. From a different salvage shop, I got this vintage school sign from Indianapolis, and I'm gonna love moving these about to find the perfect schoolhouse spot. We were, and still are, very much in our found and hand-me-down furniture phase, but one big score was a set of office bookcases salvaged from a building that my dad manages. There's something so satisfying about lining our books and finally putting up things in their places. Gave us the space to start daydreaming about what we'll eventually build into each of these rooms and spaces. Then we tackled all the glass for the original refinished doors. So you can't just use old panes, even if we had them, since door glass needs to be tempered for safety and inspections. So we ordered reproduction vintage style glass and slowly fit it into a dozen doors throughout the house. A project that would have been truly maddening without this little angle trim cutting tool. To finish it off, I used my Cricut and added the kids' names to their doors like they're tiny professors with their own offices. One other door win, we finally figured out how to cut down salvaged chalkboards to size and install them in our laundry doors. These doors are actually room dividers from a school in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, but these chalkboards came from Odin High School in southern Indiana. Missy sold them to me after her grandpa had been storing them in his barn for years, and it feels so special to give them a new life here, especially since our own school's original chalkboards are long gone. That fall also brought a few magical things, starting with the lights both outside and in the basement. And then, out of the blue, something completely surreal happened. I got an email from the producers of the Tamron Hall Show, and they wanted to feature the schoolhouse in an episode on unusual homes. So we packed up the kids, flew to New York City, and we were on TV with Tamron.
The kids in front of the school in 1915 and 1916?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Any weird sounds in the house?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's only been a month.
It's October. I was like, I went straight to camp.
I say all the ghosts got out when we took the roof off.
Okay, good. That's what I wanted to know. All the ghosts are gone from there. And you're still working on it. How much longer?
Yeah. The rest of our lives.
I love it.
I've worked in the media a long time, and this was such a funny and weird thing to be on this side of things. But honestly, the best part of all was walking around the city with the kids, showing them the place that Sean and I called home for a decade. Then, late last fall, something pretty special happened for our very empty roof deck. By this time, the YouTube channel had picked up some momentum, which is still so wild to me, and I got the chance to start working with Polywood, a company that makes super durable outdoor furniture from recycled plastic right here in Indiana. I actually drove up to their factory just a few hours from the schoolhouse and got a full behind-the-scenes tour from Bryce and Christine. And what an experience. It was so incredible to watch the entire journey, watching detergent bottles and milk jugs arriving by the truckload on one end of the factory and beautiful, long-lasting furniture coming out the other. Polywood as a company could easily cut corners. They could do things cheaper and use new plastic, but instead they commit to doing the harder thing, recycling what's already here and turning everyday waste into something truly useful. Because this whole Schoolhouse project has always been about giving new life to old materials, whether it's restoring original wood, or painting with recycled paint, or finding salvaged pieces, it felt especially meaningful to bring that same ethos onto our roof deck with Polywood's furniture. When our Polywood order arrived at the Schoolhouse, complete with a saxophone serenade from the wonderful Keith, it was then time for Sean and me to roll up our sleeves and start building. While we were working on these big projects, we did stop to have a little bit of fun, like turning all of the leftover boxes into an epic cardboard cottage village in the dungeon playroom. And then upstairs, we managed to outfit the roof deck just in time for the first visit from our New York family. And since railings weren't done, while the kids napped, we snuck out for a quick test run of the Polywood furniture, playing games and enjoying the fire pit.
Put on it.
And then Christmas rolled around, our very first Christmas in the schoolhouse. The first decorating thing we did was actually painting the front facade, courtesy of Dave the painter. It really was a big change to make the school feel a lot more festive and made hanging Christmas lights a lot more satisfying. Next up, our very first Christmas tree. We went to a local tree farm and picked one out and brought it back to the schoolhouse. Back home, the decorating began. My mom had made us the most adorable set of ornaments, each one an animal that had once lived in the schoolhouse when it was a barn. Cows and pigs and sheep and chickens, a bat, and, of course, the turkeys. And instead of a star topper, our tree proudly wore a tiny felted version of our dog, Pimp Pup, that I made a long time ago. Decorating with toddlers was its very own comedy show. You could always tell which branches they reached, and somehow every nativity scene ended up featuring dinosaurs and cars.
I can help decorate things around here. I got more to do it.
Okay.
I decided after him.
Someday we'll get to big outdoor decorations. I'm imagining making plywood reindeer for the roof, maybe? But that first Christmas, we were still focused on finishing schoolhouse projects, like hanging the enormous chalkboard that Sean's high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Hughes, gave us. Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. This chalkboard came from a school in Atlanta, Indiana, and now sits right in the heart of our schoolhouse. We use it for family notes and doodles, and watching the kids' artwork slowly evolve from adorable scribbles to slightly better scribbles. But as we decorated and tackled these projects, the schoolhouse was looking homier and homier. But the big holiday project was the dungeon, which looks like it was for the kids, but it was just as much a gift to the grown-ups. I'd always dreamed of turning one of the basement rooms into an epic playroom for rollerblading and swings, the works. But Sean, who fixes broken bones for a living, insisted on lots of foam mats under everything. So now it's kind of evolving into a padded cell for tiny hobgoblins, but it is honestly one of our best winter investments for small humans.
What am I doing?
You are skating.
I'm skating?
In late December, we also finally had the railings installed by Paul and his crew at Midstate Manufacturing. We've been working with them a lot for the inside the schoolhouse, from the railings to sandblasted grates, so it was really exciting to see this final touch go up and finally be able to let the kids out and use the deck. The rest of the winter, we hunkered down on small indoor projects. We hung a gorgeous double-sided clock that I found at, of course, Madison Street Salvage, and I swapped in a quartz movement for the clock's old motor, and we put it right above the chalkboard in the middle of the schoolhouse.
Arlo, what did we get at Facebook Marketplace?
What did we get? Maps.
And then I stumbled onto the motherlode of vintage maps on Facebook Marketplace. I still can't believe I found all these, including my white whale, a pastel-colored Indiana state map. My heart was in my throat as I unrolled this. And then I started hanging them in different spots around the schoolhouse. I'm definitely still experimenting with where things go on the walls, but all the maps are fun in a way where they don't feel dwarfed by the height of the ceilings. So we'll see.
Yeah, Margot, we got a really special package from Lennart.
But speaking of walls, Lennart, my lamp and antique dealer friend from Slovenia, the same person I got our dining chairs and hanging plant guides from, asked if I wanted any old education charts as he was cleaning out his shop and changing things up a bit.
My name is Leonard. I'm from Slovenia, and this is my vintage shop in Slovenia.
And then he just sent me a box of them. Opening that package felt like a second Christmas morning. There was an ocean-themed one, a gorgeous green grasshopper guide, a couple that I call the Guts guys that Arlo immediately claimed for his room. And if there's one thing that I've learned while scavenging Etsy and eBay and Marketplace for vintage school ephemera, it is that the Europeans have some really beautiful stuff that they used in classrooms. And in the dark, frozen doldrums of winter, we tackled round 2 of the cocktail cellar. And as someone who used to have side hustles in cocktail content creation, this was a very fun way to start converting the old engine boiler room into something really interesting. First, we sealed up the area of the basement brick to make it shed less, just like upstairs. Then we rolled in a little army of IKEA EVAR cabinets, and let me tell you, if I've learned one thing in this renovation, it is do not snub your nose at the IKEA cabinets, especially the solid wood ones. These are $100 each, they are endlessly hackable, and after a few months of using them in our pantry, we are fully sold. You can stain them and paint them or cocktail cellarify them. These things can do it all. In the future, I'm really excited to figure out a tile floor and keep evolving this space, but this was a fun winter activity to get things going. And if a tornado ever rips through our area, you'll find me in here. Mostly because it is a miniature fortress of brick and steel, but it's also a cocktail cellar. Then it was time to tackle the yard. First up, the fence row. The fence row was a 100-year-old tangle of honeysuckle, weeds, and brambles that had just been plotting for decades to reclaim their kingdom. All these yard chores became infinitely easier after a very fortuitous trip to the Ted Everett farm auction with my dad and Arlo. That's where we scored ourselves the crown jewel of our yard equipment, a magnificent, slightly scuffed, used, battery-powered club car. The moment we got it home, we knew it needed a proper schoolhouse makeover. So we built a little chore bed and turned it into a miniature school bus, and then christened her Miss G after the world's kindest school bus driver that Sean and I both had growing up. Now Miss G hauls sticks, plants, kids, and parts for our mini schoolhouse yard projects. As soon as the first real warmth of spring arrived, we jumped into a project that felt like pure magic, building the kids a dreamy playset with Cedarworks. They're such a thoughtful company with some of the coolest playgrounds I've ever seen, and they're based out of Maine. With Cedarworks, you actually get to design your own custom vision, and then they send you this giant kit of beautifully made cedar pieces. This was a very exciting day in the schoolhouse for sure. Putting it together was a little workout, but it was a fun kind of workout. Kind of like massive outdoor Lego set, except instead of tiny bricks, it's ladders and slides and climbing walls.
That's my turn. You want to go down the slide?
Yeah.
And now, having this little corner of the yard where the kids can play, invent magical games, and just run wild while we do boring adult chores, it's pretty dang precious. And we have plenty of boring adult chores. That spring evolved into a full-on backyard renaissance. I went on a bit of a birdhouse spree and put up 16 of them, and then with some kid help, or anti-help, I also planted over 60 native trees around the property. Redbuds and pawpaws and persimmons, and crabapples, oaks. Someday I'll have a little staggered cocktail orchard out here, but for now, they're little trees. The long-term dream is to fill the entire backyard with native plants and turn it into a little schoolhouse secret garden, a haven for birds and pollinators and whatever else wants to call it home, but maybe skunks and groundhogs can stay away. After planting some native shrubs and getting our first garden beds going this year, I realized that the yard is going to be less of a one-and-done project and more of a lifelong journey. Equal parts work and daydreaming and more work. Later in the spring, when things were warming up more, Fernando finished the roof of our front facade, which instantly made the building part of the schoolhouse feel more complete. Once we complete the windows, it will finally be time to think about landscaping. And around the same time, we turned our attention back to the roof deck to make it worthy of all of the Hollywood furniture. First up was resealing the deck for another year of Indiana weather, and then came the big project, building our pergola from FlexiSpot. I do have to say, this pergola really transformed the space. Suddenly the deck went from just being a really nice spot to sit in the sun to feeling like a true outdoor living room. Adjustable shade during the day, cozy string lights at night. It's become one of the best hangout spots in the schoolhouse, and definitely a bit like the Indiana version of a New York City roof deck that we were envisioning when we set out to design this roof deck garage. Our first test of the schoolhouse's capacity for parties was a surprise birthday party from my mother-in-law. It was the first time we really got to see how the schoolhouse could handle a big group of people. Guests flowing from the kitchen to the deck, and it was pretty great. It was one of those full circle moments. One of the main reasons we bought this quirky old schoolhouse in the first place was so that we could fill it with friends and family, and finally it feels like we're starting to do just that. And then, when the heat kicked in, we retreated back indoors to tackle a few projects inside the schoolhouse. One of the biggest was closing up what we lovingly refer to as the hole to nowhere. This mysterious portal sat between our bedroom and the study, a leftover doorway from the school's old layout that we rerouted during our floor plan redesign. For the past year, it's just been guarded by a baby gate, which worked, but it was a hole. But here's the problem. I had grown a little attached to the way the light flowed through the opening in between the two rooms. So we thought of an idea to turn it into a glass-backed bookshelf that connected the two rooms. Back to Madison Street Salvage I went, hunting for the perfect vintage glass. And of course, they had it. I struck some treasure and found some big pieces of glorious cat butt glass, plus a free crash course in glass cutting from Dennis and Scott.
I refer to that sound as you go across there as cooking bacon. If you can make that, as you're cutting it, sound like bacon, that's the ideal speed and pressure.
All right. I hauled everything home and we started building the bookshelf from our plans. Good job. High five. And wow, it was so satisfying to finally fill these shelves and get that hole closed up. I love figuring out the perfect little treasures to put on this shelf. Books sent by Teresa to the schoolhouse, vintage pieces mailed from Sue, and even a quirky old camera lamp that I cobbled together almost 15 years ago. That lamp has since kicked off a full-on lamp-making spiral. And I'll make some tutorials in some upcoming videos. Meanwhile, our contractors Marissa and Matt from M&M Construction tackled another huge relief, reinstalling the schoolhouse windows properly this time. There are no more leaks, no more panic every time it rains. Let's just say a massive weight has lifted. And that pretty much brings us to today. 4 years of sweat, salvaging, setbacks, and surprises, turning this old school into our home. And right now the schoolhouse is looking a lot more like this. When we first stepped into this place, it was just a daydream. A crumbling schoolhouse in the middle of the cornfields filled with echoes and possibility. 4 years later, that daydream has started to take shape. The projects are still endless. The list is still long, and most days we feel like the building is teaching us more than our minds can handle. But through it all, I'm just so thankful, because we never could have done it alone. From our parents who taught us stuff and who let us crash with them while we tore our place apart, to the contractors who shared their skills and wisdom, to the kind folks who have sent advice, encouragement, or even little packages of Schoolhouse treasures, this project has taken a village. I don't know what the next year will bring. Hopefully fewer disasters, probably lots more surprises, but what I do know is that the schoolhouse isn't just a dream anymore. It's our home. And it's a home that assigns a lot of homework. And we'll keep turning the pages, test by test, project by project, as this schoolhouse writes us into its story 1 year at a time.